Sarah Martinez wiped down the last table at Murphy's Diner as the evening crowd began to thin out. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, revealing the intricate tattoo that wrapped around her neck like a delicate collar of thorns and roses. Most people stared at it with judgment, whispering about how unprofessional it looked on a waitress. The bell above the door chimed as another customer walked in. Sarah glanced up to see a man in his 50s, wearing a crisp military uniform decorated with ribbons and insignia she didn't recognize. His posture was straight, his eyes sharp and alert as they swept the room before settling on an empty booth near the window. "I'll be right with you," Sarah called out, finishing her cleaning routine. She grabbed a menu and walked over to his table, noting how he sat facing the door with his back to the wall. Old habits, she thought. Her father had done the same thing. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you off with something to drink?" she asked, placing the menu down gently. The man looked up at her, and for a moment his eyes lingered on her tattoo. Sarah braced herself for the usual reaction, the slight frown, the disapproving shake of the head, maybe even a request for a different server. Instead, his expression remained neutral. "Professional, coffee, black, please," he said simply. Sarah nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Miss, that's an interesting piece of artwork you have there." She touched her neck self-consciously. "Thank you, sir. Most people don't see it that way. Most people don't understand the significance of what they're looking at," he replied quietly. Something in his tone made Sarah pause. There was weight behind his words, a depth that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. But before she could ask what he meant, another customer signaled for their check and she hurried away to attend to them. When she returned with his coffee, the man was studying the menu intently. "The meatloaf any good here?" he asked. "Best in town, according to our regulars. Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans." "Sounds perfect." He handed her the menu. "I'm Commander James Mitchell, by the way. Navy. Sarah Martinez. And thank you for your service, Commander." He nodded acknowledgement but said nothing more. Sarah had learned not to push conversation with military customers. They talked when they wanted to talk, stayed quiet when they needed peace. As she put in his order, Sarah caught snippets of conversation from the booth behind Commander Mitchell. Three young men in their 20s were laughing loudly, their voices carrying across the diner. "Did you see that freak show waitress?" one of them snickered. "What kind of person puts gang tattoos on their neck?" "Probably fresh out of prison," another added. "I wouldn't want her handling my food." Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She'd heard variations of these comments countless times, but they still stung. The tattoo wasn't gang-related at all, but explaining that to strangers never seemed worth the effort. Commander Mitchell's jaw tightened slightly, though he didn't turn around. His coffee cup remained steady in his hands, but Sarah noticed his knuckles had gone white. The kitchen bell rang, signaling that his meal was ready. Sarah retrieved the steaming plate and brought it to his table, trying to ignore the continued snickering from the booth behind him. "Here you go, Commander. Is there anything else I can get you?" "No, thank you. This looks excellent." As Sarah turned to leave, one of the young men called out loudly, "Hey, waitress!" "Yeah, you with the prison ink. Can we get some more napkins over here?" The diner fell silent. Other customers turned to look, some with curiosity, others with obvious discomfort at the blatant rudeness. Sarah felt her face flush with humiliation, but she maintained her composure. "Of course. I'll bring those right over." She walked to the service station, her hands trembling slightly as she grabbed a handful of napkins. This was exactly why she usually worked the early morning shift when the diner was quieter. When she could avoid confrontations like this, behind her, she heard Commander Mitchell's fork clink against his plate as he set it down. When she turned back toward the dining room, she saw him looking directly at the table of young men, his expression unreadable but somehow more intense than before. "Here are your napkins," Sarah said quietly, placing them on their table while avoiding eye contact. "About time," the first young man said. "You know, maybe you should consider getting that thing removed. It's not exactly appetizing to look at while we're trying to eat." His friends laughed, clearly enjoying the show. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She'd been through worse than a few rude customers. "I'll leave you gentlemen to finish your meal," she said, turning away. "That's right, walk away," one of them called after her. "Maybe think about finding a job where you don't have to interact with decent people." The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been working 2 jobs to support herself through nursing school, saving every penny to build a better life. This job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and she'd never understood why people felt the need to make her feel ashamed of it. She retreated behind the counter, pretending to organize the silverware while fighting back tears. The diner had returned to its normal volume of conversation, but she could still feel eyes on her from various tables. Some customers looked sympathetic, others seemed amused by the entertainment. Commander Mitchell continued eating his meal in silence, but Sarah noticed he kept glancing toward the booth of young men. There was something calculating in his expression, as if he was making some kind of decision. The front door chimed again as more customers entered, a family with 2 small children who needed a high chair and coloring books. Sarah forced herself to smile and focus on her work, pushing the embarrassment aside. She'd learned long ago that the best response to cruelty was simple dignity and professionalism. But as she seated the family and took their drink orders, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Commander Mitchell had finished his meal and was now sitting quietly, his hands folded on the table, watching everything with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for exactly the right moment to act. The 3 young men at the corner booth continued their loud conversation, oblivious to the growing tension in the diner. They had moved on from mocking Sarah to bragging about their weekend plans, their voices carrying across the restaurant with the confidence of people who had never faced real consequences for their actions. Sarah tried to focus on her other tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders, but she could feel the weight of stares from other customers. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity about what would happen next. The tattoo around her neck felt like it was burning under the attention. Commander Mitchell had been sitting quietly for nearly 20 minutes now, his empty plate pushed aside. He nursed his second cup of coffee while observing the room with the same alertness Sarah had noticed when he first arrived. His eyes would occasionally settle on her tattoo, not with judgment, but with something that looked almost like recognition. "Sarah," called Mrs. Chen from table 6, "could you bring us the check, dear?" "Of course, Mrs. Chen." Sarah was grateful for the distraction. Mrs. Chen was a regular customer who always treated her with kindness, never commenting on her appearance or asking personal questions. As she processed the payment, Mrs. Chen lowered her voice. "Don't let those boys bother you, honey. Some people just weren't raised right." "Thank you. I appreciate that. That tattoo of yours is beautiful, by the way. It must have taken a lot of sessions to get that detail work done." Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. "It did. Thank you for noticing the artistry instead of just seeing something to judge." Mrs. Chen patted her hand gently. "My grandson is a tattoo artist. I know good work when I see it. That's not just decoration. That's meaningful to you, isn't it?" Before Sarah could answer, another burst of laughter erupted from the corner booth. The young men had apparently found something new to amuse themselves with, and their voices grew even louder. "I bet she can't even read," one of them said, loud enough for half the diner to hear. "Probably just picked that design because it looked tough." Commander Mitchell's coffee cup hit the table with a sharp clink. The sound was quiet, but something about it made several customers turn in his direction. His expression remained calm, but Sarah noticed his breathing had changed, becoming more controlled and deliberate. The evening manager, Tony, emerged from the back office with a concerned look on his face. He'd clearly heard the commotion and was trying to decide whether to intervene. Tony was a good man, but he was also trying to run a business, and sometimes that meant avoiding confrontations that might drive customers away. "Everything okay out here?" Tony asked, approaching Sarah at the counter. "It's fine, Tony, just some customers having a good time." "Maybe too good a time," he muttered, glancing toward the corner booth. "Want me to say something?" Sarah shook her head. "I can handle it. They'll leave eventually." But even as she said it, she could see the young men settling in for a longer stay. They had ordered dessert and more coffee, clearly enjoying their position as the center of attention. The ringleader, a blond man wearing an expensive polo shirt, kept glancing in her direction with a smirk that made her skin crawl. Commander Mitchell stood up slowly, reaching for his wallet. Sarah approached his table to settle his bill, trying to maintain her professional demeanor despite the continued harassment from across the room. "How was everything tonight, Commander?" "The meal was excellent. Best meatloaf I've had in years." He placed exact change on the table, including a generous tip. Tell me something, Sarah. That tattoo, did you design it yourself? The question caught her off guard. Most people either ignored the tattoo entirely or made disparaging comments about it. No one had ever asked about the design process. Actually, yes. Well, I worked with an artist to refine it, but the concept was mine. The thorns and roses, they're not random, are they? There's a pattern there, a meaning. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. How could he possibly know that? The design looked decorative to most people, but it was actually a carefully constructed memorial piece, each element representing something specific. You're very observant. Commander, it's my job to notice details that others miss. He stood up, straightening his uniform jacket. Those symbols around the base of your neck, are they what I think they are? Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her throat. Hidden within the decorative thorns were tiny symbols that most people never noticed. Military insignia so small and subtle that they looked like part of the artistic design. Only someone with extensive military knowledge would recognize them for what they really were. Maybe we could discuss that another time, she said quietly, acutely aware that the young men were still within earshot. Commander Mitchell nodded, understanding. I'd like that very much. But first, I think there's something these gentlemen need to understand. He turned toward the corner booth, his movements precise and purposeful. The three young men looked up as he approached, their laughter dying as they took in his military bearing and the array of ribbons on his chest. Good evening. Gentlemen, Commander Mitchell said in a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about the young lady's tattoo. The blonde ringleader straightened in his seat, trying to project confidence. Yeah, what about it? I was wondering if you'd like to know what those symbols actually represent before you continue making assumptions. Look, old man, we're just having a conversation. It's not really your business. Commander Mitchell's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere around him. Other customers sensed it too, conversations quieting as people turned to watch the confrontation. Actually, it is my business. You see, I've spent 30 years in the military, and I recognize memorial tattoos when I see them, especially ones honoring fallen service members. The booth fell silent. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. He had seen through the design completely, understanding its true meaning in a way that no one else ever had. Those aren't gang symbols or prison tattoos. As you so eloquently suggested, Commander Mitchell continued, they're military insignia honoring people who died serving their country. People who gave their lives so you could sit here tonight and say whatever you want without fear. The young men exchanged uncertain glances. The mood in the diner had shifted completely, with other customers now watching with obvious disapproval of their earlier behavior. We didn't know, one of them mumbled. No, you didn't know, but that didn't stop you from making cruel assumptions and treating this young woman with disrespect. Commander Mitchell's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath the words. The question now is what you're going to do about it. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, watching the scene unfold. She had never told anyone about the true meaning of her tattoo, keeping the painful story locked away. Now this stranger, this commander, had not only seen through her carefully hidden memorial but was defending its honor in front of everyone. The three young men sat in stunned silence, their earlier bravado completely deflated. The blonde ringleader's face had gone pale, while his companions looked like they wanted to disappear into their seats. The entire diner watched the confrontation with rapt attention, the only sounds coming from the kitchen and the soft hum of the overhead lights. Commander Mitchell remained standing beside their table, his presence commanding respect even in silence. He wasn't being aggressive or threatening, but there was an unmistakable authority about him that made it clear he was accustomed to difficult conversations and wouldn't be easily dismissed. I'm waiting for an answer, gentlemen, he said quietly. What are you going to do about the way you've treated this young lady? The second young man, a brunette wearing a college sweatshirt, finally found his voice. We should apologize. We didn't mean any harm. Didn't mean any harm? Commander Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. You publicly humiliated someone based on your own ignorance and prejudice. In my experience, that kind of behavior is always harmful, whether you mean it to be or not. Sarah watched from behind the counter, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to intervene, to tell the commander that it was okay, that she was used to this kind of treatment. But another part of her, A part that had been buried under years of accepting other people's judgment, felt a surge of gratitude that someone was finally standing up for her. The blond man cleared his throat. "Look, we're sorry, okay? We made a mistake. Are you sorry?" Commander Mitchell asked. "Or are you just embarrassed that you got caught being cruel to someone who's honoring fallen heroes?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see other customers nodding in approval of the commander's words. An elderly man at a nearby table even muttered, "About time someone said something." "We're really sorry," the third young man said, finally speaking up. "We acted like jerks. It won't happen again." Commander Mitchell studied them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Apologies are a good start, but they should be directed to the person you wronged, not to me." All three young men turned to look at Sarah, their faces red with embarrassment. She felt exposed under their gaze, but also strangely empowered. For the first time in months, she wasn't the one who felt ashamed. The blond man stood up awkwardly. "Miss Sarah? We're really sorry. We were completely out of line. We had no right to say those things about you or your tattoo. It was ignorant and cruel," the brunette added. "We're truly sorry for hurting your feelings." The third man nodded vigorously. "Yeah, we're really sorry. That was totally uncool of us." Sarah looked at their faces, seeing genuine remorse mixed with embarrassment. She could tell they were sincere. Probably good kids who had gotten caught up in trying to impress each other and had let their behavior spiral out of control. "I accept your apology," she said simply. "Thank you for saying that." The tension in the room eased slightly, but Commander Mitchell wasn't finished. "Now, I think you owe this establishment an apology as well. Your behavior disrupted other customers' meals and created a hostile environment." The young men looked around the diner, finally seeming to realize that their actions had affected more than just Sarah. Other customers were still watching, some with disapproval, others with curiosity about what would happen next. "We're sorry to everyone," the blond man said louder, addressing the room. "We acted inappropriately and were embarrassed about our behavior." A few customers nodded acknowledgement, and gradually conversations began to resume. The immediate crisis had passed, but Sarah could feel that something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of the diner. Commander Mitchell returned to his table and sat down, gesturing for Sarah to join him. She glanced around to make sure her other customers were taken care of, then slid into the booth across from him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." His voice was firm but gentle. Those young men needed to understand the gravity of their words. But more importantly, you deserve to have someone stand up for you. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Most people just see the tattoo and make assumptions. They think I'm trying to look tough or rebellious. But it's not about looking tough, is it? It's about remembering someone. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak for a moment. "My brother Marcus. He was deployed to Afghanistan 3 years ago. His convoy hit an IED outside of Kandahar." Commander Mitchell's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss." "How old was he?" 22. He'd been in the Army for 4 years, was planning to come home and go to college. Sarah touched her neck gently. The tattoo incorporates his unit insignia, his rank, and the date he died. Most people just see thorns and roses, but every element means something. It's a beautiful memorial. He would be honored. You really could tell what it was just by looking at it. The military insignia are subtle, but they're there if you know what to look for. More than that, though, there's something about the way memorial tattoos are designed. They have a reverence to them, a solemnity that decorative pieces don't have. Sarah wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. "I've never told anyone the real meaning before. People always react so negatively to it that I just stopped trying to explain. That's their loss. Anyone who would judge you for honoring your brother's memory doesn't deserve an explanation anyway." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between them. Sarah had spent so long feeling isolated by her grief and the visible reminder she wore of it. Having someone not only understand but respect her choice felt like lifting a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. "Can I ask you something, Commander?" "Of course. How did you know to look so closely?" Most people glance at it and immediately form an opinion. Commander Mitchell was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. "I've seen a lot of memorial tattoos over the years. Soldiers, sailors, Marines. They all find ways to honor their fallen friends. But there was something about yours that felt familiar. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I knew Marcus. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What? Staff Sergeant Marcus Martinez, 82nd Airborne Division. He served under my command during his first deployment to Afghanistan. Outstanding soldier, one of the best I ever had the privilege to lead. The world seemed to tilt around Sarah. Of all the diners in all the cities in the country, her brother's former commanding officer had walked into hers on this particular night. You knew Marcus? She whispered. I recommended him for promotion to Staff Sergeant myself. He earned every bit of rank he achieved. Commander Mitchell's voice was heavy with emotion. I was there when we got the news about the IED. It was one of the worst days of my career. Sarah stared at him in shock, her mind racing to process this impossible coincidence. He used to write about you in his letters. Commander Mitchell, he said you were the best officer he'd ever served under. He was like a son to me. They all were, but Marcus was special. He had this way of keeping morale up even in the worst situations. Always looking out for the younger soldiers. The tears Sarah had been holding back finally spilled over. I can't believe this is happening. What are the odds? Maybe it's not about odds, Commander Mitchell said gently. Maybe Marcus wanted us to meet. Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process the impossible revelation that her brother's commanding officer was sitting across from her in Murphy's diner. The tattoo around her neck seemed to pulse with new meaning, as if Marcus himself was reaching across time and space to bring them together. Tell me about him, Commander Mitchell said gently. What was he like before the army? Sarah smiled through her tears, grateful for the chance to talk about Marcus with someone who had known him as a soldier. He was always the protector, even when we were kids. Our father left when I was 8 and Marcus was 12, and he just stepped up without being asked. Mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, so Marcus made sure I got to school, helped with homework, scared off boys who were trouble. That sounds like the Marcus I knew, always putting others before himself. When he enlisted, I was furious. I thought he was abandoning me like Dad had. But he explained that the Army would give him skills and benefits that could help our whole family. He was going to use his GI Bill to become an engineer, then help me through nursing school. Commander Mitchell nodded. He talked about you constantly. Sarah this, Sarah that. He was so proud when you got accepted to nursing school. He showed everyone your acceptance letter. The thought of Marcus bragging about her to his fellow soldiers made Sarah laugh despite her tears. That sounds like him. He always believed in me more than I believed in myself. He used to say his sister was going to save more lives than any soldier ever could. He said you were going to be the best nurse in the world because you had the biggest heart. Sarah had to take a moment to compose herself. I'm struggling with school, honestly. Working here and at a grocery store to pay tuition, trying to keep up with classes. Some days I think about quitting. Marcus wouldn't want you to quit. I know. That's the only reason I keep going. But it's hard, Commander. Everything is so much harder without him. Commander Mitchell leaned forward, his expression serious. Can I tell you something about your brother that might help? Sarah nodded. During Marcus's second deployment, we faced some of the heaviest fighting I'd seen in my career. We lost several good soldiers in the span of 2 weeks, and morale was at rock bottom. The men were scared, exhausted, ready to give up. Do you know what Marcus did? What? He organized a letter-writing campaign. Every single soldier in our unit had to write a letter to someone back home, telling them about something good that had happened that week. Didn't matter how small, a good meal, a funny joke, a successful mission. Marcus said that if we focused on the good things, even tiny ones, it would remind us why we were fighting. Sarah felt a fresh wave of emotion. That was so like Marcus, finding light in the darkness, helping others when he was struggling himself. The letters worked. Morale improved, the men started looking out for each other again, and we made it through that deployment with no additional casualties. Marcus probably saved lives with that simple idea. He never told me about that in his letters home, because he wasn't doing it for recognition. He was doing it because it was right. That's who your brother was, someone who made things better just by being there. Sarah wiped her eyes with a napkin. I miss him so much, Commander. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning without him. I understand that feeling, but let me ask you something. Do you think Marcus would want you to drown, or would he want you to swim? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She could almost hear Marcus's voice in her head, telling her to stop wallowing and start fighting. He'd want me to swim, she admitted. Then that's what you need to do, not just for him, but for yourself. And for all the patience you're going to save when you become a nurse. They were interrupted by Tony approaching their table with a concerned expression. Sarah, is everything okay? I saw what happened earlier with those kids. Everything's fine. Tony, Commander Mitchell here was just making sure they understood how to treat customers properly. Tony looked at the commander with new respect. Well, thank you for that. We don't tolerate harassment of our staff, but sometimes customers need to hear it from someone besides management. It was my pleasure. Sarah is a credit to your establishment. After Tony left, Commander Mitchell turned back to Sarah. How long have you been working here? About 1.5 years. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and the hours work around my class schedule. And the tattoo. How long have people been giving you trouble about it? Sarah sighed. Since the day I got it. People see a young woman with a neck tattoo and immediately assume the worst. I've been passed over for jobs, kicked out of stores, treated like a criminal just for existing. That must be incredibly frustrating. It is. But the tattoo means more to me than their opinions do. I'm not going to hide it or remove it just to make narrow-minded people comfortable. Commander Mitchell smiled with approval. Marcus would be proud of that attitude. He never backed down from doing what he believed was right, even when it was difficult. Can I ask you something personal, Commander? Of course. Do you have any memorial tattoos? He was quiet for a moment, then rolled up his left sleeve to reveal a series of small symbols tattooed along his forearm. Each one was different. Names, dates, military insignia. Every soldier I've lost under my command, he said simply. 37 names. Marcus was number 34. Sarah stared at the tattoos, understanding flooding through her. You carry them all with you, every day. It's a reminder of the weight of command and the cost of freedom, but also of the honor of serving with such brave people. They sat in silence for a moment, two people united by grief and love for the same remarkable man. Sarah felt something shifting inside her, a strength she hadn't accessed in years beginning to surface. Commander, can I ask you a favor? Anything. Would you tell me more stories about Marcus? I have his letters, but I'd love to hear about him from someone else's perspective. I'd be honored to. In fact, why don't we make it a regular thing? I'm stationed about an hour from here, but I could drive over once a week or so. We could have dinner and I'll tell you every Marcus story I can remember. Sarah felt her heart lift for the first time since Marcus's death. I would love that more than anything. Good. Because I have a feeling that Marcus would want us to look out for each other. As if summoned by their conversation, the 3 young men from earlier appeared at their table. The blonde ringleader cleared his throat nervously. Excuse me, Sarah? We wanted to give you this before we left. He handed her a folded piece of paper along with a $20 bill. We know it doesn't make up for how we acted, but we wanted you to have this. Sarah unfolded the paper to find a handwritten note. Thank you for your brother's service and sacrifice. We're sorry for our ignorance and promise to be better, with respect and gratitude. All 3 had signed it. This is very thoughtful, Sarah said, genuinely touched. Thank you. After they left, Commander Mitchell nodded approvingly. Sometimes people just need to be educated instead of condemned. Those young men learned something important tonight. Thanks to you. No, thanks to Marcus. His memory inspired both their apology and my intervention. He's still making the world a better place. Sarah looked down at the note in her hands, then at the commander's memorial tattoos, and finally touched her own neck where Marcus's memory lived permanently on her skin. For the first time since her brother's death, she felt like she wasn't carrying her grief alone. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself looking forward to Thursday evenings in a way she hadn't anticipated anything in years. Commander Mitchell had kept his promise, driving the hour from his base to have dinner at Murphy's Diner every Thursday night. What had started as shared grief had evolved into something more. A friendship built on mutual respect and the memory of a remarkable young man. Tonight, as she prepared for his visit, Sarah noticed something different about herself in the bathroom mirror. The shadows under her eyes were lighter, her posture straighter. The tattoo around her neck no longer felt like a burden she carried alone, but rather a badge of honor that connected her to something larger than her own pain. You're glowing, said Maria, another waitress who had become curious about Sarah's weekly visitor. This commander guy must be quite something. It's not like that, Sarah laughed. He knew my brother. He's helping me understand parts of Marcus's life that I never knew about. Well, whatever it is, it's good for you. You seem lighter somehow. The bell above the door chimed precisely at 7 o'clock, and Commander Mitchell entered with his usual military punctuality. He'd traded his formal uniform for civilian clothes, khaki pants and a navy polo shirt, but his bearing remained unmistakably military. "Good evening, Sarah," he said, settling into their usual booth by the window. "Good evening, Commander. The usual, please. And you know you can call me James when I'm not in uniform." Sarah smiled as she headed to the kitchen to place his order. It was their weekly routine now. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and black coffee. Simple, consistent, reliable. Like the man himself. When she returned with his coffee, Commander Mitchell pulled out a manila envelope. "I brought you something tonight." "What is it?" "Photos. I asked around to some of the other soldiers who served with Marcus, and they shared copies of pictures they had." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of photographs showing Marcus in various situations. Training exercises, downtime at the base, group shots with his fellow soldiers. In every picture, he was smiling or laughing, clearly beloved by his unit. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, studying a photo of Marcus teaching a group of younger soldiers how to clean their weapons. "I've never seen most of these." That one was taken during his second deployment. Marcus was always mentoring the new guys, making sure they knew how to stay safe. Sarah flipped through the photos, each one revealing a side of her brother she'd only glimpsed in his letters. Marcus playing cards with friends, Marcus helping local children in Afghanistan, Marcus standing proudly beside a Humvee he'd helped repair. "He looks so happy," she said, wiping away a tear. He was. Marcus was one of those rare people who found joy even in difficult circumstances. It's a gift that not many people have. "I used to have that gift," Sarah admitted. "Before he died, I was the optimistic one in our family. Always seeing the bright side, believing things would work out. What happened to that part of you?" Sarah considered the question while studying a photo of Marcus with his arm around two other soldiers. "I think it died with him. How can you stay optimistic when the best person you know gets killed for no reason? Maybe the question isn't how to stay optimistic, but how to honor that optimism he believed in." Before Sarah could respond, she noticed a commotion near the front of the diner. A woman in her 50s was arguing with Tony about something, her voice growing louder and more agitated. "I don't care what your policy is," the woman was saying. "I'm not being served by someone who looks like a gang member. It's unprofessional and frankly it's disgusting." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Not again. She had hoped that after the incident 2 weeks ago, word might have spread that her tattoo wasn't what people assumed, but apparently there would always be someone new to judge her. "Ma'am, I assure you that Sarah is one of our best employees," Tony was saying, trying to keep his voice calm. "She's professional, courteous, and I don't care about her work ethic. I care about the image your restaurant is projecting. What kind of establishment employs people who look like criminals?" Commander Mitchell's coffee cup hit the table with a sharp clink, the same sound Sarah remembered from their first meeting. But this time, instead of the controlled anger she'd seen before, his expression was one of calm determination. "Excuse me for a moment," he said to Sarah, standing up with deliberate precision. "James, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He walked toward the front of the diner with the same purposeful stride Sarah had witnessed 2 weeks earlier. But this time felt different. This time he wasn't just defending a stranger. He was protecting someone who had become important to him. "Pardon me," Commander Mitchell said politely, approaching the woman and Tony. "I couldn't help but overhear your concerns about the young lady's appearance." The woman turned to him with obvious relief, clearly expecting to find an ally. "Finally, someone with sense. You understand how inappropriate it is to have employees who look like that, don't you?" "Actually, ma'am, I understand exactly what that tattoo represents. And I think you might want to hear the story before you continue making demands about Sarah's employment." "I don't need to hear any story. A tattoo like that speaks for itself." Commander Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right. It does speak for itself. It speaks of sacrifice, honor, and love for someone who died serving our country." The woman's expression faltered slightly. "What are you talking about?" "That tattoo is a memorial for Staff Sergeant Marcus Martinez, 80th 2nd Airborne Division. He was killed in action in Afghanistan 3 years ago, while serving his second tour of duty. Sarah is his sister." The diner had gone quiet again, other customers turning to listen. Sarah watched from their booth, clutching the photographs of Marcus against her chest. "The symbols you're calling gang markings are actually military insignia honoring a fallen hero," Commander Mitchell continued. Every element of that tattoo was carefully chosen to represent something about her brother's service and sacrifice. The woman's face had gone pale. I didn't know. No, you didn't know. But you were perfectly willing to demand that a grieving sister be punished for the way she chose to honor her brother's memory. Tony stepped forward. Ma'am, perhaps you'd like to sit down. I'm sure Sarah would be happy to serve you despite— Actually, Commander Mitchell interrupted gently. I don't think that's necessary. I think this lady was just leaving. It wasn't a suggestion. Despite his polite tone, there was an unmistakable authority in his voice that made it clear he wasn't interested in negotiating. The woman looked around the diner, finally seeming to realize that every other customer was staring at her with disapproval. Yes, I think I should go. She gathered her purse and headed for the door, her earlier indignation replaced by obvious embarrassment. As the door closed behind her, the diner gradually returned to its normal volume of conversation. Commander Mitchell returned to their booth, where Sarah was still holding the photos of Marcus. She looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and something else, a growing sense of her own worth that had been buried under years of other people's judgment. Thank you, she said simply. You don't need to thank me. You deserve to be treated with respect. I'm starting to believe that, Sarah admitted. For the first time in years, I'm starting to believe that. She looked down at the photos again, her eyes settling on one that showed Marcus laughing with his arms spread wide, as if he was embracing the whole world. You know what he'd say if he were here? What? He'd say I should stop letting other people's ignorance make me feel small. He'd say the tattoo is beautiful because it represents love, and love is never something to be ashamed of. Commander Mitchell smiled. He'd be right. I've been thinking about what you said about honoring his optimism instead of just mourning his loss. And? Sarah straightened in her seat, and Commander Mitchell could see something shifting in her demeanor, a return of the strength that Marcus had always bragged about. I want to do something. Something that would make him proud. Something that would help other people instead of just feeling sorry for myself. What did you have in mind? I'm not sure yet, but I know it needs to be bigger than just surviving. Marcus didn't die so I could spend the rest of my life hiding from ignorant people. He died believing I was going to make a difference in the world. Commander Mitchell nodded approvingly. Now you're starting to sound like your brother. Good, Sarah said, touching her tattoo with pride instead of self-consciousness for the first time in months. It's about time. As they talked through the rest of dinner, making plans for how Sarah might channel her grief into something positive, neither of them noticed the small group of customers who had been watching the evening's events with growing interest. Word was beginning to spread about the young waitress with the memorial tattoo and the Navy commander who had become her champion. And sometimes when the right people start paying attention, ordinary moments can transform into something extraordinary. 3 months after her first meeting with Commander Mitchell, Sarah's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Their weekly dinners had become the foundation for something much larger, a memorial scholarship, fund in Marcus's name that was already helping 3 military families pay for their children's education. The idea had started small, just Sarah and Commander Mitchell, discussing ways to honor Marcus's memory more actively. But word had spread through the military community, and soon donations were pouring in from soldiers who had served with Marcus, families who had lost their own service members, and complete strangers who had heard the story and wanted to help. Tonight was different from their usual Thursday dinner. Tonight, Sarah had invited a local newspaper reporter to meet them at Murphy's Diner. The story of the waitress with the memorial tattoo and the Navy commander who had defended her had captured people's imagination, and the scholarship fund was gaining national attention. Sarah checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror one last time before the reporter arrived. She wore a simple black dress that showed her tattoo clearly, no longer trying to hide it with scarves or high collars. The memorial around her neck had become a conversation starter rather than a source of shame, a way to share Marcus's story with the world. You ready for this? Asked Maria, who had become Sarah's biggest supporter among the diner staff. I think so. It's strange, you know. A few months ago I was terrified of people staring at my tattoo. Now I'm about to be in a newspaper talking about it. Marcus would be so proud of you. Sarah smiled, touching the tattoo gently. I hope so. Commander Mitchell arrived early as always, wearing his dress uniform for the interview. The sight of him in full military regalia never failed to impress the other customers. But tonight Sarah noticed something different in their reactions. Instead of the polite deference she usually saw, there was genuine warmth and recognition. Word had spread about his weekly visits and his defense of Sarah, and he had become something of a local hero. "How are you feeling?" he asked as he sat down across from her. "Nervous, excited, terrified, all at the same time. That sounds about right. Just remember, you're not doing this for the attention. You're doing it to help families like yours, families who need support after losing someone they love." Sarah nodded, drawing strength from his words. The scholarship fund had already raised over $50,000, enough to provide substantial help to military families struggling with education costs. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, arrived promptly at 7. Sarah had expected someone pushy and intrusive, but Jennifer was gentle and respectful, clearly understanding the sensitive nature of the story. "Thank you both for agreeing to this interview," Jennifer said, settling into the booth beside Sarah. "I have to say, your story has touched a lot of people. The response to the preliminary article about the scholarship fund has been overwhelming." "We're grateful for all the support," Sarah said. "Marcus would be amazed by how many people have been willing to help." "Tell me about the night you two first met," Jennifer said, pulling out a small recording device. "I understand it was quite dramatic." Sarah and Commander Mitchell exchanged glances, and Sarah began telling the story of that first encounter. As she spoke, she noticed other customers in the diner turning to listen, even though they had probably heard various versions of the tale already. "What struck me most," Commander Mitchell added when Sarah finished, "was her dignity. Despite being treated cruelly, Sarah never lost her composure or her professionalism. That's a rare quality, and it's exactly what I would have expected from Marcus's sister." "Speaking of Marcus," Jennifer said, "I understand you have some photos and letters that give us insight into what he was like as a soldier." Sarah opened the envelope that had become a permanent fixture at their weekly dinners. Over the months, it had grown to include letters from other soldiers who had served with Marcus, commendations he had received, and even a few items from his personal effects that the Army had returned to their family. "This is my favorite," Sarah said, showing Jennifer a photo of Marcus teaching a group of Afghan children how to play baseball with improvised equipment. He wrote about this day in one of his letters. He said the kids had never seen baseball before, but they picked it up so quickly that they were hitting his pitches all over the field. "Marcus had this way of connecting with people," Commander Mitchell explained. "It didn't matter if they were fellow soldiers, local civilians, or scared new recruits. He made everyone feel valued and protected." As they talked, more customers began gravitating toward their booth. Mrs. Chen, the elderly regular who had always been kind to Sarah, pulled up a chair. Then the young man who worked at the auto shop down the street joined them, followed by a family who had driven from the next town over specifically to meet Sarah after reading about the scholarship fund online. "This is incredible," Jennifer whispered to Sarah as their impromptu gathering grew. "I've never seen anything like this." What had started as a simple interview had transformed into a community celebration. People shared their own stories of military service, of family members they had lost, of times when they had been judged unfairly for their appearance or background. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, no longer the isolated waitress trying to hide her grief, but a focal point for healing and connection. "Sarah," said a voice from the back of the group. A middle-aged man in a veteran's cap pushed forward, his eyes fixed on her tattoo. "I served with your brother in his first deployment." "I'm Tom Bradley," Sarah's breath caught. She recognized the name from Marcus's letters. Tom had been his squad leader and had helped train him when he was still new to combat situations. "Tom," she said, standing up to embrace him. "Marcus wrote about you constantly. He said you taught him everything he knew about staying alive over there." "Your brother saved my life twice," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. "Once from an IED and once from my own stupidity. I've been wanting to meet you for years, but I didn't know how to find you." "How did you find me now?" "The newspaper article. When I saw your name and the description of your tattoo, I knew it had to be Marcus's sister. I drove 4 hours to get here tonight." The room fell silent as Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metal object, a military medal Sarah didn't recognize. "This is a Bronze Star," Tom said. Marcus earned it during our first deployment for saving those lives I mentioned. He never got the chance to receive it officially because he was killed during his second tour, but the Army finally processed the paperwork, and they asked me to make sure it got to his family. Sarah stared at the medal in disbelief. He never told me about this. That was Marcus. He never bragged about his heroics, just did what needed to be done and moved on. But this medal represents lives saved, Sarah. Your brother was a genuine hero. Commander Mitchell stood up slowly, his expression solemn and proud. Tom, would you do the honors? I'd be privileged to. Tom held up the Bronze Star, and in a voice that carried throughout the suddenly silent diner, he said, This medal is awarded to Staff Sergeant Marcus Martinez for heroic achievement in ground operations in Afghanistan. His actions reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. As Tom handed the medal to Sarah, something extraordinary happened. Commander Mitchell came to attention and rendered a sharp military salute. Tom immediately followed suit. Then one by one, every veteran in the room stood and saluted as well. The moment stretched on in perfect silence. A diner full of people honoring a fallen hero they had never met, but whose sister had touched their lives. Sarah clutched the medal against her chest, overwhelmed by the weight of so much love and respect for her brother's memory. When the salutes finally ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Jennifer, the reporter, was openly crying as she took notes, clearly understanding that she was witnessing something far more powerful than a simple human interest story. Marcus would be so proud, Sarah whispered, looking around at all the faces surrounding her. Not just of the medal, but of this. Of all of you coming together like this. We're proud of you too, said Mrs. Chen. You've turned your grief into something beautiful. You've brought this whole community together. As the evening wound down and people began to say their goodbyes, Sarah realized that her life had fundamentally changed once again. She was no longer just a waitress trying to survive her brother's death. She had become the keeper of his legacy, the guardian of his memory, and the focal point for a community of people who understood the true cost of freedom. The scholarship fund would continue to grow, helping more families every year. But more than that, Marcus's story would live on through everyone who had been touched by this night, spreading ripples of compassion and understanding that would reach far beyond anything Sarah could have imagined. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the lobby of the Regional Medical Center, adjusting her brand-new nursing uniform with hands that trembled slightly with excitement rather than fear. The white fabric was crisp and clean, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The scholarship fund, named after Marcus, had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What had started as a small memorial had become a national organization, providing educational assistance to hundreds of military families across the country. The initial newspaper article had been picked up by national media, leading to television interviews, speaking engagements, and donations from every state in the Union. But perhaps more importantly, Sarah had finished nursing school. The financial support from the scholarship fund, combined with her own determination and the encouragement of her extended military family, had carried her through the most challenging academic period of her life. She had graduated summa cum laude, with honors that Marcus would have celebrated for weeks. "Ready for your first day?" asked Commander Mitchell, who had driven down specially to see her off. He was retiring from active duty next month, but their weekly dinners had continued throughout her final year of school. The friendship that had begun with shared grief had evolved into something that felt like family. "I think so," Sarah said, touching her neck where Marcus's memorial tattoo was clearly visible above her uniform collar. "It feels surreal. All those nights studying while working double shifts, wondering if I'd ever actually make it through school. Marcus never doubted you would. I know. I can almost hear him telling me to stop being nervous and go save some lives." The hospital had specifically recruited Sarah after learning about her story and her academic achievements. The administrator who hired her had been moved by her resilience and her commitment to helping others, seeing those qualities as exactly what they wanted in their nursing staff. As they walked toward the elevator that would take her to the pediatric ward where she would be working, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that night at Murphy's Diner, when Commander Mitchell first stood up for her. The scared, isolated young woman who had been afraid to explain her tattoo was gone, replaced by someone who wore her brother's memory with pride and purpose. "Sarah," called a familiar voice from across the lobby. She turned to see Jennifer Walsh, the reporter who had written the first article about the scholarship fund. Jennifer had become a friend over the past year, continuing to follow the story as it grew and evolved. "Jennifer, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to document your first day. This feels like the perfect ending to Marcus's story. His sister becoming a nurse, saving lives just like he always said she would." "It's not an ending," Sarah corrected gently. "It's a beginning." As they rode the elevator up to the pediatric floor, Sarah thought about all the people who had become part of Marcus's extended legacy. Tom Bradley had become the scholarship fund's veteran outreach coordinator. Mrs. Chen had organized a fundraising committee among the regular customers at Murphy's Diner. Even the three young men who had initially mocked her, Tattoo had reached out months later, asking how they could contribute to the fund as a way of making amends for their behavior. The elevator doors opened to reveal a cheerful hallway decorated with colorful murals and children's artwork. This was where she would spend her days, caring for sick children and supporting their families through some of the most difficult times of their lives. It was exactly the kind of work Marcus had always said she was meant to do. Ms. Martinez, a woman in scrubs, approached with a warm smile. "I'm Linda Patterson, the head nurse on this floor. We're so excited to have you join our team." "Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I have to say, your story has been an inspiration to our entire staff. The way you've honored your brother's memory while pursuing your own dreams, it's remarkable." As Linda began showing Sarah around the ward, introducing her to other nurses and explaining the routines and procedures, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness about where she was. This was what Marcus had envisioned for her, using her caring nature and determination to make a real difference in people's lives. "One more thing," Linda said as they finished the tour. "We have a special patient I'd like you to meet. His name is David. He's 8 years old and he's been here for several weeks dealing with a serious illness. He's been asking about the new nurse with the special tattoo ever since he heard you were coming." They walked to a room where a small boy with a bald head and bright eyes was sitting up in bed, surrounded by toy soldiers and action figures. When he saw Sarah, his face lit up with curiosity. "Are you the nurse whose brother was a real soldier?" David asked immediately. "I am," Sarah said, sitting down beside his bed. "His name was Marcus, and he was very brave, just like you're being right now. Can you tell me about him?" "I want to be a soldier when I grow up." Sarah looked at this brave little boy, fighting his own battle with courage that would have made Marcus proud, and felt the last piece of her healing fall into place. She had found her purpose, not just as a nurse, but as someone who could share Marcus's story with others who needed inspiration and hope. "I'd love to tell you about him," she said, settling in for what she knew would be the first of many such conversations. Marcus always said that the bravest soldiers weren't the ones who weren't scared, but the ones who were scared and did the right thing anyway. As Sarah began telling David about his hero brother, Commander Mitchell and Jennifer watched from the doorway. The transformation was complete. The grieving sister had become a healer. The isolated waitress had become a community builder, and Marcus's memory had become a source of strength rather than sorrow. "She's exactly where she belongs," Commander Mitchell said quietly. "Marcus would be proud," Jennifer agreed. Down the hall, Sarah's voice could be heard telling David about his brother's sense of humor, his loyalty to his friends, and his unshakable belief that every person deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. It was a lesson that had started with a simple tattoo in a small-town diner, but had grown into something that touched hundreds of lives, and would continue spreading for generations to come. The memorial around Sarah's neck caught the afternoon sunlight, streaming through David's hospital room window, each symbol and element clearly visible and proudly displayed. She no longer hid her grief or her love. Instead, she wore both as reminders of what really mattered in life. As she finished her first story about Marcus and promised David many more in the days to come, Sarah knew that her brother's legacy was secure, not just in the scholarship fund that bore his name, or in the bronze star that now hung in a place of honor in her apartment, but in every life she would touch as a nurse, every family she would comfort, and every person who would learn about courage and compassion through Marcus's story. The young woman who had once been ashamed of her memorial tattoo had become its proudest guardian, ensuring that Staff Sergeant Marcus Martinez's sacrifice would never be forgotten, and that his belief in the power of love and service would continue to inspire others for years to come. In the end, that was the greatest tribute of all. not just remembering a fallen hero, but living in a way that honored everything he had stood for.